Hello and welcome to the College Football Focus. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. And we're here to talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes and JT Barrett. No. We're here to talk about college football plays for Saturday, for the main slate. And it just so happens to be that the first player you want to talk about is JT Barrett. $8,800 on FanDuel, $78,000 on DraftKings. And this is a game, obviously, biggest game of the season for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Maybe you can argue the Michigan thing. I disagree. But this is the biggest game. You got to win this game, obviously, if you're going to make the playoff again. Buckeyes should win this game, but I'm kind of biased here. I just don't see JT Barrett having much issue with this Michigan State defense because you and I were talking for the show here, and this defense was much, much better last year, and JT Barrett had his way with them.
Yeah, so technically we are talking about JT Barrett. That's not all we're talking about in this podcast, just to make that clear. But yeah, I really like him within this slate. I think he's probably one of the best quarterbacks within this slate, and his price is pretty moderate considering that. The only other quarterback that I think is somewhat on his level would be Brandon Doughty of Western Kentucky, and that's a DraftKings only play. And Doughty's actually $1,000 more expensive over there as well. So I would rather take the discount with Barrett. And then on FanDuel, he's obviously the best play there within this price range, as Watson and Marquise Williams are both priced up. But then, yeah, like you said, Barrett, he had 300-plus yards passing, 3 touchdowns through the air last year, 76 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns against Michigan State on the road against a better defense last year. As we saw time and time again throughout the season, the Spartan defense has kind of, been a little laxed. It happened against Rutgers. It happened against Nebraska. There's no reason to believe that it won't happen against an Ohio State team at home, pumped up for senior day. So I really like JT Barrett, and, mostly out of opportunity cost because there really isn't that Trayvon Boykin or the Baylor quarterback or any of those guys within this slate. So I think, Barrett probably has the best floor upside combination.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly not going to disagree with any of that. Skyler Howard next up for West Virginia, $6,900 on FanDuel. FanDuel only pick here. And you know the drill by now. Most weeks we're playing somebody here against Kansas. Kansas, I don't know what the analogy would be. The Cleveland Browns, maybe, of college football. They're just not good. They're really not good at anything. And really, you have to beat yourself to not put up big numbers against them, which we saw one time. I don't remember what team it was. Texas Tech, maybe, that struggled against them.
Yep.
But aside from that, it's who do you want to score? Because that's the guy you give the ball to.
Yeah, and I'm thinking this is more of a tournament play, as I think Barrett is probably the best cash game play by far on FanDuel. But Skyler Howard, it really depends on how West Virginia handles this game. If they want to turn him loose, he's going to have a great fantasy day. And there's, some reason to think that'll happen because they've kind of been leaning that way over the past few weeks. He has 4 rushing touchdowns this season, 2 of those coming in the past 3 weeks. So, he does have that upside on top of throwing the deep ball, which against Kansas, he could convert a lot of those. 6,900 price point, very moderate. I like him as a tournament pivot off of Barrett.
Yeah, like that. Perry Hills, another guy from Big Ten here in Maryland, and this is a guy who's had some big games against pretty good defenses here. 6,500 DraftKings only here. As you mentioned, he put up big-time numbers against Penn State and Iowa, and then now he gets one of the worst, if not the worst, defense in the Big Ten in Indiana.
Yeah, and I kind of parallel him to Joe Huebner of Kansas State, where he gets most of his production on the ground, not much in the passing game, maybe 150 to 200 yards and a touchdown. That's basically the most you're looking out of him through the air. But he also has 150-yard upside in the running game, 2 touchdowns. He did it against Penn State and Iowa. And now he probably has his easiest matchup as a starter. That's against Indiana this week in what's supposed to be a tight, relatively high-scoring game. So, just looking at the fact that he produced against some solid defenses, now he has a great matchup. It just sets up for a breakout performance.
Yeah, I definitely like that a lot. And anybody else aside from Huebner who you just mentioned that you want to throw out here, quarterback?
Yeah, I got a couple more. Chad Kelly is actually the same price or very similar to Perry Hills on DraftKings, that is. $6,600, that's just way underpriced considering he's 9,100 on FanDuel, and that's probably a more accurate representation of his fantasy potential. So I like him as a QB2 on DraftKings. And then another tournament pick here, Paxton Lynch of Memphis. He's been kind of middling as of late, but they're playing Temple in what could be a back-and-forth game, relatively high scoring. So I'm thinking Paxton Lynch is kind of a sneaky play if you're getting away from Barrett or you need a second quarterback on DraftKings.
All right, I like that. Moving over to running back here, LaShawn Daniels from Iowa. You're mentioning how there's a lot of top dollar running backs that have tough matchups here. And as we've seen, this is an Iowa rushing attack that has been very potent. It really doesn't matter if it's Canzeri or Daniels, whoever it is, having a lot of success. I mean, that's one of the better offensive lines in football. So you get him, that DraftKings price specifically looks really nice.
Yeah, I had to triple check that DraftKings price because I really didn't believe it when I saw it. He's definitely a core play over there. Still a core play on FanDuel for $7,300 because, I mean, the reasons you mentioned with the top running backs having pretty tough matchups. If you remember, Daniels was the starter heading into the season. A lot of people were high on him, thinking he could have a breakout year. Got hurt in the middle of the season, came back 3 weeks ago. They've kind of been easing him back into action, and then over the past 2 weeks, he got his full workload of 25-plus carries. Last week, taking that for 195 yards and 3 touchdowns against Minnesota, and now he takes on Purdue, which is the absolute worst run defense in the Big Ten. They rank 110th nationally against the run, so, I mean, I think that's an easy pick. Go with Daniels all the way.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Next up, we've got Whittle Smallwood from West Virginia. We've seen him a couple times in here in this article, of course. And once again, it's the second half, the versus Kansas part that you love about this play, aside from the fact that he's actually a good player.
Yeah, we seem to mention him almost every week, and I mean, we can't not mention him against Kansas, right? His price is still pretty attainable, $7,600. He's at 100-plus yards 5 of the past 6 games. I'm guessing he gets 150-plus yards, 1 to 2 touchdowns in this one. As West Virginia's 28-point favorites, which is kind of within that range where it's not necessarily a complete blowout, but just enough to run out the clock in the second half. So that sets up pretty well for Smallwood as well.
Yeah, definitely like that. Next up, Demario Richard, another guy who's been on here a few times, and mentioned we're looking at waiting on status of Anu Solomon, who has been injured a couple times here recently in the past month or so. But Richard, nice and cheap. Facing off against Arizona, a nice rivalry game as well, and he certainly has big upside because we've seen that at times this year.
Right, and there's not actually a Vegas line for that because of that Solomon injury, so that's what we're waiting for. But, I mean, you don't really need Vegas to tell you that this one should be high scoring. You have a couple bad defenses going against each other in a Pac-12 game, so that's all you really need to know here. Arizona is 91st in rush defense. Arizona State at home here, I'm expecting them to be about 5 to 7 point favorite or so, maybe even more if Solomon's out. So that kind of bodes well to game flow in the rushing game. The only small concern is that Richard and the backup Ballage are kind of splitting carries. Richard's been getting more over the past 3 weeks, more like 18 carries to Ballage's 12. And he's also the more talented running back, so I would go his way of the two. That's not to say Ballage isn't a bad tournament option at a little bit cheaper of a price, but Richard is their number one guy. He's very talented. He's active in the passing game and the running game, and I mean, this matchup just sets up very well for him.
I like that. Any other running backs you got here that you want to?
Yeah, I have a DraftKings special here. Knile Newsome of UConn. We haven't seen him in this game slate yet this year, so I'm guessing a lot of people will overlook him. But he is, let me look it up, I had it written down. He's 7.2K on FanDuel and 4.9K on DraftKings. So you look at that pricing discrepancy. I think that, I might even consider him on FanDuel for 7.2K. He's that good. He catches a ton of passes out of the backfield, which is great on DraftKings. I think he has a reasonable floor on receptions alone. let alone getting 15 to 20 carries and having that rushing upside too. So I really like him. Speaking of another guy who gets a lot of receptions, FanDuel only play Taquan Mizell of Virginia. They're facing Duke. And Duke's been really bad as of late. I mean, I think they've given up something ridiculous, like 160 points over the past 3 weeks, just getting gashed in the rushing game. So I like Mizell.
Game too. Like that was a fun one.
just getting gashed everywhere, passing game, return game, everything. But Mizell, 6.4K. He's averaging 18 FanDuel points per game. I think that's his baseline for this one with upside for more. So that's a great mid-range pick there. And then one more, Ronald Jones, who's kind of taken on the lead back responsibilities for USC. Trey Madden, their other running back that sometimes is in the mix. He will be out, has officially been ruled out for this game, so it will be a heavy dose of Ronald Jones. And I actually just looked up this stat a little bit ago. Oregon, the team they're playing in what should be a shootout that Vegas expects, actually ranks 95th in the country in yards per carry allowed. So sets up pretty well for Ronald Jones, especially given that USC has been running the ball more under the new head coach. So I like him as a value play as well.
Yeah, okay, I like that. And then that's a perfect transition over here to Juju Smith. He's almost more famous for his Vine and his troll job against was it Utah? Yeah, best defense in the country, and then the stiff arm, which was just phenomenal. I mean, love the guy or hate the guy, I don't care. I'm not a UFC fan, but I can respect something like that where you're putting him in his place. But $7,500 against FanDuel, $7,000 on DraftKings, and this is an Oregon defense that's been pretty bad this year. I mean, we've seen a lot of nice values emerge facing them this season, really from a bunch of different teams. So this is just a spot you're really not too worried about.
Yeah, and as I kind of alluded to earlier, 71 over under the highest of this slate. Definitely want your exposure on both ends. And I think Juju Smith is just one of the safest wide receivers in this game slate. I mean, kind of as we were saying at quarterback with JT Barrett, there's not many other high upside, reliable top end options. I mean, there's not a Corey Coleman, guys like that. There's not the Western Kentucky guys on FanDuel. They are on DraftKings. That kind of segues over there. I do like Tywan Taylor of Western Kentucky on DraftKings. He's not in the article because of that, DraftKings only designation. But 6.2K, I might take him over Juju Smith for an $800 discount. But Juju is definitely the top play on FanDuel, and I'm going to have him in most of my lineups.
Yeah, I definitely like that. Past him, we got Michael Thomas going back to the Buckeyes. 6,000 on FanDuel, 5,000 on DraftKings, and this is definitely the most NFL-ready wide receiver prospect the Buckeyes have.
Not Braxton Miller?
No. Unless you're gonna draft him as athlete. I mean, I don't know. I like Braxton Miller. I think he has NFL potential. I don't know if it's as a wide receiver or what it may be, but Michael Thomas definitely the best receiver on the team. Not quite the deep threat that Devin Smith was, anything like that, but he's a good possession receiver, gets red zone looks, and I mean, factoring in the price here, he's a relative bargain for, especially if JT Barrett has the kind of success he did last year against Michigan State.
Yeah, and I think it's a great pairing with JT Barrett to kind of put those two together, especially considering the mid-range is kind of, there's a few good picks, but there's no one really just jumping out and screaming value at you. So I think Michael Thomas is a pretty safe pick within that for a reasonable price point. He's caught a touchdown in 4 straight games. He's not going to get a ton in terms of reception and yardage, but he'll get enough targets to get in the end zone in this one, I'm guessing, especially considering Michigan State's run defense is pretty decent. So maybe they'll load the box, try to stop Elliott, and Thomas can kind of catch one over the top that way. But he has 8 touchdowns overall in this season, so I think he'll get into the end zone once again.
Yeah, and I would not be surprised to see that. Darren Carrington from Oregon missed the first 4 games of the season this year, like you mentioned here. 6,400 on FanDuel, 56 on DraftKings, and had a big game against Washington. Now facing off against USC, we already mentioned how the Oregon defense not very good. Someone's going to need to make plays down the field if they're going to compete with this offense on the other side. So Carrington seems like he fits the bill pretty well.
Yeah, so he's played in 4 games this year, and he has 4 touchdowns. In 3 of those games, he went over 100 yards. So He's easily the favorite target of Vernon Adams. I really like him in this high-scoring game. He's pretty cheap as well. I mean, for that 100-yard, 2-touchdown upside, I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer in this spot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like that. Any other wide receivers you want to put in here?
Yeah, I got a couple more. One of my favorite tournament picks is Robbie Anderson of Temple. He's virtually the only receiver that they really throw to. Granted, they don't throw the ball a lot, but I think that's more out of, just the game flow of their previous games, as, Temple's kind of beaten up on some of the smaller schools. So this is a 1-point spread with Memphis, might be kind of a back and forth affair. And Memphis has one of the worst passing defenses in the nation. So maybe Temple just goes ahead and attacks that susceptibility, and Robbie Anderson can get his hands on a couple of deep passes. So I like him, 5.7K on FanDuel, 4.5K on DraftKings. And then we have to mention Chesson of Michigan. I believe we mentioned him last week, kind of in this also consider section. I actually got someone tweeted me on Twitter, "Hey, thanks for the Chesson pick," and I was kind of envious because I didn't play as much of him as I probably should. But we have to mention him again, coming off that 4-touchdown game. The only reservation is that his price is up a little bit, especially on FanDuel. So I think I would lean to him more on DraftKings as kind of a filler value play. It's just, you don't know what that Michigan offense, I mean, they kind of had to pass last week to stay in that game, just going back and forth. That may not be the case this week. We don't really know. So it's at Penn State. Should be a tight game, but I don't see kind of the shootout that we saw last week. This is going to be kind of a closer slugfest, 17-14 type of game. So Chesson's decent because if they are going to throw the ball, it's going to be to him, but I just don't know how much they're going to throw the ball.
Yeah, plus, I mean, they're no Ohio State, let's be honest about that.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Next up, tight end, everyone's favorite position to love to not want to play. Now that Western Kentucky seems like they have an affiliation with DraftKings, and we just don't seem to ever get their games anymore. I mean, it's just either way. Bucky Hodges from Virginia Tech, $3,600 here, and you mentioned here, kind of the few times you have mentioned him on here, this guy has big time upside, but don't lock him in as a guy that you just can guarantee production. Like, he has potential, but he's not just an instant play.
Yeah, I think he's more of a tournament play for this price, as you can kind of get some cheaper guys, build some room for stabilizing the rest of your lineup. And I've watched the past few Virginia Tech games, and it seems like they have a concentrated effort to spread the ball around a little more. So that's kind of hurt Bucky Hodges' upside, but it still might be there. In this matchup against UNC, good offense, quick strike offense, but not a very good defense. Could lead to more possessions, more chances for Hodges, especially if Virginia Tech falls behind in this one. So I like him more for tournaments.
Okay, I like that. Moving over here to Alan Cross from Memphis. Like you mentioned here, again, not going to see a lot of receptions, but he's a guy who gets red zone looks, and as you probably know by now in college football, what you're looking for is red zone and touchdown opportunities with your tight end. Very few guys are going to get a lot of work between the 20s.
Yeah, so this is your cheapskate special that you're just hoping for a touchdown, and he probably has one of the higher probabilities of these cheap tight ends to actually get in the end zone. This is a fairly high-scoring game with Temple. In that Memphis offense, they just love to air it out and love to move the ball down the field. So I'm guessing there will be several red zone opportunities for him. Just hope he gets his hands on one. He does have 13 receptions the past 4 games, 2 touchdowns, so it's promising that he is somewhat involved with that offense. So I think for cash games and some tournaments alike, I'm probably just going to take a chance with him and spend up elsewhere.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Evan Engram from Mississippi, last up, $2,400, and opposite of Cross, as you mentioned here, probably won't be scoring touchdowns, but he's a guy that does get work between the 20s, so if you're looking for the safe play without much upside just because you know you're going to get a couple points, that seems like the spot to go.
Yeah, and he'll get 4 or so receptions, 4 to 5 receptions, maybe 40 yards, so there's some decent production within that rather than just hoping, for a guy like Cross who gets 1 to 2 catches and hopefully gets in the end zone without hardly any yardage. It's just a matter of preference within that. Engram only has 1 touchdown all season. Granted, I mean, LSU's defense is pretty good, so maybe they'll look to their safety valve a little more. I don't know. Maybe that's just speculating as well because it really hasn't happened in previous matchups. But he's just another one of those cheap tight ends that I think a lot of people will be on cross because he did catch a touchdown last week, and people might want to chase that. So kind of a pivot off of him would be Evan Engram for 200 less.
All right, I like that a lot. That's going to wrap things up for us here for this week. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Lots of other great content for every other sport at dailyfantasycafe.com.